The Arizona Territory in 1887 wasn't the kind of place you read about in those cheap adventure books sold back east. It was harder than that, meaner. The sun didn't just shine, it hammered down on you like a blacksmith working hot iron. The land was all dust, and thorns and rocks that could tear up a horse's hooves if you weren't careful. And everywhere you went, there was this feeling in your gut that you were being watched. Tommy Whitaker was 17 that summer, though he'd been lying about his age since he was 15. He told folks he was 19 because nobody wanted to hire a kid to work cattle drives through Apache country. He'd come all the way from Kansas with nothing but a bedroll, a second-hand rifle, and a head full of dreams about becoming a real cowboy. The kind of man other men respected, the kind who didn't flinch when things got rough. Reality had a different lesson waiting for him. He'd signed on with Old Man Crawford's outfit 3 months back, working for $30 a month in meals. The food was mostly beans and hardtack, and the work was nothing like the stories. It was all dust in your mouth, saddle sores, and watching cattle that seemed determined to wander into every dangerous situation they could find. The other cowboys, men with weather-beaten faces and hard eyes, mostly ignored him. They called him boy when they bothered to call him anything at all. Tommy didn't mind too much. He figured he just had to prove himself. One good moment where he showed what he was made of, and they'd see him different. That's how it worked in the stories anyway. The trouble started on a Tuesday in late August. They were moving about 200 head of cattle from the ranch to a buyer down near the Mexican border. It was a 3-day drive through some of the roughest country in the territory. Everyone knew the Apache had been active in the area. There'd been reports of raids on smaller ranches, and the cavalry had been chasing bands of warriors through the mountains for weeks. The trail boss, a tough old Texan named Bill Hendricks, had made it clear before they left. You stay with the herd. You don't wander off. You don't do nothing stupid. Apache can spot a lone rider from 5 miles away, and they won't be asking questions before they act. Tommy had nodded along with everyone else, trying to look like he'd been on a dozen drives just like this one. On the second day, the weather started to change. The morning had been clear, but by afternoon, dark clouds were building up over the mountains to the east. In the Arizona Territory, storms didn't creep in slow like they did back in Kansas. They came on fast and mean, with lightning that could kill a man or start a wildfire in seconds. They were following a dried-up creek bed when Tommy's horse, a sorrel gelding named Red, stepped wrong and came up lame. 1 minute they were moving along fine. The next, Red was favoring his right front leg and wouldn't put weight on it. Tommy dismounted to check the hoof and found a sharp stone wedged in there deep. He worked at it with his knife, but the horse was in pain and kept pulling away. By the time he got the stone out and looked up, the rest of the herd had moved on. He could see the dust cloud they were raising maybe half a mile ahead. Red was limping bad, so Tommy started walking, leading the horse and hoping to catch up before full dark. That's when the storm hit. It wasn't rain at first, just wind that came howling down from the mountains like something alive and angry. Then the sky opened up, not a gentle rain but sheets of water that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Lightning cracked so close Tommy could smell the electricity in the air. Thunder rolled across the canyon walls and bounced back on itself until it sounded like the whole world was coming apart. Tommy pulled his hat down low and kept walking, but he'd lost sight of the herd's dust trail. The wash they'd been following was starting to run with water, just a trickle at first, but growing. He knew enough about flash floods to understand he needed to get to higher ground. He led Red up the side of the canyon, slipping on wet rocks, his clothes already soaked through. Night was coming on fast, made darker by the storm clouds. Tommy was starting to get scared, though he wouldn't have admitted it out loud. He was alone in Apache country with a lame horse, no idea which direction the herd had gone, and a storm that showed no signs of letting up. The stories never talked about this part, the cold fear in your belly when you realized you might have made a mistake that couldn't be fixed. He was about to find some rocks to huddle under when he saw something that made him stop. Through the rain and gathering darkness, there was a flicker of orange light. Fire. Someone had a fire going in this weather, which meant shelter of some kind. Tommy's first thought was relief. His second thought came slower. Whoever was out here might not be friendly. Could be outlaws, could be Apache, could be anybody. But he was cold and wet and lost, and his horse needed rest. Sometimes you don't have good choices. You just have the choice right in front of you. He led Red toward the light, moving slow and careful. As he got closer, he could make out shapes through the rain. It was a small camp tucked into an overhang in the canyon wall. There were 2 brush shelters, wickiups, he realized with a jolt. Apache shelters. And near the fire, wrapped in a blanket and tending the flames, was a young woman. She looked up when he got close enough to see clearly. For a long moment, they just stared at each other through the rain. Tommy's hand went to the rifle slung across his back, but he didn't draw it. The woman didn't move either. She just watched him with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to be taking his measure. She couldn't have been more than 18 or 19. She wore traditional Apache clothing, a long skirt and a blouse decorated with beadwork. Her hair was long and dark, and there was something about the way she held herself. Calm, unafraid. That made Tommy feel like the intruder he was. "I don't mean any trouble," he called out, his voice barely carrying over the storm. "My horse is lame. I just need to wait out the rain." She didn't answer at first. Then she stood up, letting the blanket fall from her shoulders, and made a gesture toward one of the empty wickiups. Not welcoming exactly, but not sending him away either. Just acknowledging the reality of the situation, the storm, the night, the simple human need for shelter. Tommy led Red under the overhang where the horse could stand out of the worst of the rain. Then he walked toward the fire, moving slow so she could see he wasn't a threat. When he got close enough, she pointed to the second wickiup, then to him. The message was clear. He could stay, but over there, away from her. He nodded and ducked into the shelter, grateful to be out of the rain. As he wrung water from his shirt and tried to stop shivering, one thought kept running through his mind. He was in an Apache camp with an Apache woman alone in the middle of the night. Everything he'd heard said this should end badly, but something in her eyes when she'd looked at him, it wasn't hatred or fear. It was something else. Something he couldn't quite name. Outside, the storm raged on, and Tommy Whitaker sat in the dark wondering what the morning would bring. Tommy sat in the darkness of the wickiup, listening to the rain hammer against the brush covering. His clothes were still wet, and every few minutes a shiver would run through him that he couldn't control. He could see the fire through the gaps in the shelter, and beyond it the silhouette of the woman as she moved around the camp. He tried to make sense of where he was and what was happening. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. In all the stories he'd heard, Apache camps were full of warriors. There were supposed to be dozens of people, weapons everywhere, danger at every turn. But here there was just one woman, alone, keeping a fire going in the rain. After about an hour, when the worst of the storm had passed to a steady rain, she appeared at the opening of his shelter. She was carrying something wrapped in cloth and a gourd filled with water. She set them down just inside the entrance and stepped back quickly, like you might approach a stray dog you weren't sure about. Tommy reached for the bundle and unwrapped it, dried meat and some kind of bread made from corn. His stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since morning. "Thank you," he said, meeting her eyes. "Thank you." She nodded once, then turned to go back to the fire. But she paused and looked back at him. When she spoke, her English was clear but careful, each word pronounced with attention. "You should not be here. It wasn't a threat." "Just a statement of fact, I know," Tommy said. "I got separated from my outfit. The storm came up fast and my horse went lame. I saw your fire and—" He stopped, not sure how to explain that he'd had no other choice without sounding like he was making excuses. "Where is your outfit?" she asked. "I don't know. Following the old trail south, but I can't see anything in this weather. I'll leave at first light soon as it's safe to travel." She studied him for a long moment. "You are not what I expected." "What do you mean?" "The cowboys who come through here, they are hard men, mean. You are just a boy." Tommy felt his face flush hot despite the cold. "I'm old enough," he said, hearing the defensiveness in his own voice. Something that might have been a smile crossed her face, though it was gone too quick to be sure. "Yes, old enough to get lost in a storm and wander into an Apache camp. Very grown up." Despite everything, the cold, the fear, the strangeness of the situation, Tommy almost laughed. There was something about the way she said it, the dry humor in her tone that caught him off guard. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, like she was deciding whether to answer. "Nasha. It means owl in my language. I'm Tommy. Thomas Whitaker, but everyone calls me Tommy." "Tommy," she repeated, testing the sound of it. Then she turned and went back to her fire. For a while, Tommy ate the food she'd brought and tried to get warm. But curiosity was gnawing at him. Why was she alone out here? Where were her people? The question seemed rude to ask straight out, but they wouldn't leave him alone. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. He got up and walked to the fire, keeping a respectful distance. Can I ask you something? Nasha looked up from the fire. The flames cast shadows across her face, making her expression hard to read. You can ask. Why are you out here by yourself? Where's your family? For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. She poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. They will return in the morning. They are waiting out the worst of the storm at another camp a mile from here. But why did they leave you? It is tradition, she said quietly. Tomorrow I am to be married. Tonight is my last night alone, to prepare myself and pray, to say goodbye to the person I was before. Tommy didn't know what to say to that. He sat down near the fire, not too close but close enough to feel its warmth. Is he a good man? The one you're marrying? Nasha laughed, but there was no happiness in the sound. I do not know him well. He is from another band to the west. The marriage is to bring our groups closer together to make us stronger against... She stopped and gestured vaguely. Against everything that is coming. You mean white settlers? People like me. She looked at him directly. Yes, people like you. Though you seem less dangerous than most. So you don't want to marry him? What I want does not matter much. She said it simply, like she was stating the weather. He is older, a good hunter and warrior. He will provide for me. My father says it is a good match. Tommy thought about his own father, dead 3 years now from pneumonia. Before he died, he'd had plans for Tommy. Wanted him to learn bookkeeping, maybe work in a store back in Kansas. Safe work, respectable work. But after the funeral, Tommy had taken what little money there was and headed west instead, chasing something he couldn't quite name. My father had plans for me too, Tommy said. I didn't follow them either, but at least I had a choice. You had a choice because you are a man, Nasha said. And because you are white. 2 things I am not. She was right, and Tommy knew it. He'd never thought much about it before, how much freedom he had just because of the way he was born. It made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite explain. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire. The rain was letting up, and through breaks in the clouds, Tommy could see a few stars appearing. The night didn't seem quite as dark or frightening as it had an hour ago. Can I tell you something? Nasha said suddenly. Something I have not told anyone? Tommy nodded. She reached into a bag beside her and pulled out a small leather-bound book. The kind fancy people back east might use as a journal. I went to a mission school when I was younger. The priests taught me to read and write English. They wanted me to forget my language, forget my people's ways. But instead I learned both. She opened the book and Tommy could see pages filled with neat handwriting, some in English, some in symbols he didn't recognize. I am writing down the old stories, she said, the ones my grandmother told me, the ones that explain where we came from and how we should live. The priest said these stories were lies, but they are not. They are truth, just a different truth than the one in their Bible. Tommy leaned closer to look at the pages. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow I will be someone's wife and he may not understand. He is a traditional man and he might think this is foolish. And after tomorrow, she paused, choosing her words carefully. After tomorrow I do not know what will become of these stories. Of any of us. There was something in her voice that made Tommy's chest feel tight. A sadness that was bigger than just one person's feelings about a wedding. It was the sadness of watching your whole world change and knowing you couldn't stop it. What's the story? Tommy asked, pointing to an open page. Nasha looked down at the book. This one is about Coyote and Bear. Coyote was always playing tricks, thinking he was smarter than everyone. One day he met Bear, and Bear taught him that wisdom is not the same as cleverness. That sometimes the quiet ones who watch and listen learn more than the loud ones who always talk. She looked up at Tommy. The white people who come here, they are like Coyote. They think they know everything. But they do not listen. They do not see what is already here. Tommy felt like she was talking about more than just the story. What do you see when you look at me? He asked. Nasha tilted her head, considering. I see a boy who is lost. Not just tonight in the storm, but lost in a bigger way. You came west looking for something, yes? To become something? I guess so. I wanted to be, I don't know. Someone who mattered. Someone strong. And are you finding it? Tommy thought about the last 3 months. The hard work, the loneliness, the way the other cowboys looked right through him like he wasn't even there. No, he admitted, Not really. Then maybe, Nasha said softly. You are looking in the wrong place. The fire crackled between them, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Tommy didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Sometimes he was learning. Silence was its own kind of answer. They sat there together, two people from different worlds, both trying to figure out where they belonged, while the storm clouds cleared and the stars came out above the Arizona territory. Around midnight, Tommy started to feel strange. At first he thought it was just exhaustion catching up with him. The day had been long and the fear and cold had worn him down. But as he sat by the fire listening to Nasha tell another story from her book, the world started to tilt sideways. His skin felt too hot and too cold at the same time. Sweat broke out on his forehead even though moments before he'd been shivering. The firelight seemed to pulse and blur, and Nasha's voice sounded like it was coming from far away, down a long tunnel. "Are you well?" he heard her ask. But the words took too long to make sense in his head. "I don't..." Tommy tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He sat down hard on the ground. "I don't feel right." Nasha was beside him in an instant, her hand on his forehead. Her palm felt cool against his burning skin. She said something in Apache, sharp words that might have been a curse or a prayer, and then switched back to English. "You have fever. How long were you in the rain before you came here?" Tommy tried to remember, but his thoughts were scattered like cards thrown in the wind. "I don't know, a while. Maybe 2 hours. You are soaked through and you have been sitting in wet clothes." She stood up quickly, moving with purpose now. "You need to get warm and dry or this will get worse." She disappeared into the other wickiup and came back with a thick blanket and what looked like a bundle of dried plants. "Take off your wet shirt," she ordered. "I will turn away." Tommy's hands fumbled with the buttons. His fingers didn't seem to want to work right. Everything felt disconnected, like his body belonged to someone else. Finally, he got the shirt off and wrapped the blanket around his shoulders. The fabric was rough but warm, and it smelled like sage and smoke. Nasha was crouched by the fire, crushing some of the dried plants between her hands and adding them to water heating in a clay pot. The steam that rose up had a sharp, clean smell that cut through the fog in Tommy's head for a moment. "My grandmother taught me medicine," Nasha said as she worked. "White people have their doctors with their bottles and knives. We have other ways, older ways. Will it work?" Tommy asked. His voice sounded weak even to his own ears. "If you drink it and rest, yes. If you are stubborn and stupid like most men, maybe not." She glanced at him, and despite his misery, Tommy caught the hint of humor in her eyes. She brought him the cup of steaming liquid. It tasted bitter and earthy like drinking the forest floor, but he drank it all down. Almost immediately, warmth spread through his chest and belly. Whether it was the medicine or just the hot liquid, he couldn't say, but it helped. "Lie down," Nasha instructed, pointing to the wickiup. "I will keep the fire going and watch over you." "You don't have to do that," Tommy protested, but even as he said it, another wave of dizziness hit him. "Yes, I do," she said firmly. "If you die here, your people will say Apache killed you. They will come looking for revenge. So you will live, and in the morning you will leave, and no one needs to know about this night." That made sense in a practical way, but Tommy thought there might be more to it than that. Something in the way she looked at him suggested she wasn't just worried about revenge, but he was too sick to puzzle it out. He made his way to the shelter and collapsed onto the bed of pine branches and blankets she'd prepared. The last thing he saw before his eyes closed was Nasha sitting by the fire, her profile sharp against the flames, keeping watch. The fever dreams came hard after that. Tommy's mother was there, even though she'd died when he was 9. She was calling his name, but he couldn't reach her. His father was there too, disappointed and shaking his head. The other cowboys from the ranch stood in a circle around him, laughing at something he couldn't understand. And through it all there was fire and rain and the sound of thunder that never stopped. Sometime in the dark hours before dawn, he woke up gasping. For a moment he didn't know where he was. Then he felt a cool cloth on his forehead and heard a soft voice singing words he didn't understand. Nasha was sitting beside him, bathing his face with water from the creek. "Easy," she said when he tried to sit up. "The fever is breaking, but you must rest." "I was dreaming," Tommy mumbled. "Bad dreams. Fever dreams," she nodded. "They show us what we fear, what we carry inside that we do not want to see. I saw my mother. She's been dead 8 years, but in the dream she was alive and I couldn't get to her. Nasha wrung out the cloth and laid it across his forehead again. You miss her, every day. She was the one who believed I could be something. My father, he loved me, but he wanted me to be practical. Safe. My mother said I had a good heart, and that mattered more than being practical. She was right, Nasha said quietly. How do you know? You just met me. Because you are here sick with fever and you said thank you when I gave you food. Because when I told you about my wedding, you asked if he was a good man. You did not say that's just how things are like most would. You thought about whether it was right? Tommy closed his eyes. Her words made him feel both better and worse at the same time. I don't feel like I have a good heart. I feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. Like I'm playing dress-up in cowboy clothes, and any minute everyone will figure out I don't belong. Then we are the same, Nasha said. I went to the white man's school and learned to read their books. I speak their language. But when I came back to my people, some said I was not really Apache anymore. And tomorrow I will marry a man who wants a traditional wife, and I do not know if I can be that person. So we are both pretending, yes? Both trying to fit into a shape that does not quite match who we are. Tommy opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked at her. In the dim light before dawn, with her hair loose around her shoulders and tiredness showing on her face, she didn't look like the mysterious Apache woman from the stories. She just looked like a person who was scared and uncertain and trying her best with the cards life had dealt her. What do you want? He asked. If you could have anything, not what your father wants or what your people need, but what you want. Nasha was quiet for so long, Tommy thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want to keep writing my stories. I want to teach children, both Apache and white, so they understand each other. I want to build a bridge between the two worlds instead of watching them destroy each other. But that is not possible. That is a dream, nothing more. Why not? Tommy asked. Why can't you do that? Because I am one woman and the world is very large. Because my people are being pushed onto reservations and the white people see us as enemies or obstacles. Because tomorrow I will become someone's wife and my dreams will not matter anymore. They should matter, Tommy said. Dreams should matter. Nasha smiled sadly. You are young. You still believe that. My mother believed it, and you called her right a minute ago. That got a real smile from Nasha, small but genuine. You are clever when you have fever. I should give you more medicine, make you wise all the time. Despite everything, the sickness, the fear, the strangeness of the night. Tommy laughed. It hurt his chest, but it felt good too. Real Nasha checked his forehead again. The fever is better. You will live, I think, thanks to you. Yes, she agreed. Thanks to me. So you owe me a debt now. That is how it works. What kind of debt? She thought about it, her eyes distant. When you leave here in the morning, you will go back to your ranch. You will work with other white men. And some of them will speak badly about Apache people. They will say we are savages, that we have no feelings or thoughts like they do. When they say these things, I want you to remember this night. Remember that I am a person with dreams and fears just like you. And maybe, if you can do it safely, tell them they are wrong. I can do that, Tommy said. Good. That is the debt paid. The sky outside was beginning to lighten. Soon the sun would rise and Nasha's family would return. The night that had seemed like it might last forever was coming to an end. Tommy felt the weight of that. The knowledge that this strange, unexpected connection would be broken by daylight. I wish things were different, he said. Many people wish that, Nasha replied. But wishes do not change the world. Only actions do. She stood up and went back to the fire. Tommy lay in the wickiup watching the sky turn from black to gray to pink, thinking about dreams and debts and the kind of courage it took to keep hoping when the whole world seemed set against you. By the time full light came, his fever had broken completely. He felt weak but clear-headed, and something had changed inside him during that long night. Something he couldn't quite name but knew he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The sun was climbing higher now, painting the canyon walls golden red. Tommy stood outside the wickiup testing his legs. They felt shaky, like he'd been sick for a week instead of just one night. But he could stand. He could walk. That meant he could leave before Nasha's family arrived and turned this whole situation into something dangerous. Nasha was packing up her things, moving with quiet efficiency. She'd rolled up her blankets and was tucking her precious book of stories deep into a leather bag. The fire had been reduced to embers. Soon there would be no sign that they'd spent the night talking like old friends instead of strangers from two different worlds. Tommy went to check on Red. The horse's leg looked better after a night of rest. The swelling had gone down, and when Tommy pressed gently on the hoof, Red didn't pull away in pain. They might be able to make it back to the ranch if they took it slow. "Your horse cannot carry you far," Nasha said from behind him. She'd walked up so quietly he hadn't heard her approach. "Not with that leg. And you are still weak from the fever." "I'll manage," Tommy said. "I have to. Your family will be here soon, and if they find a white cowboy in my camp, there will be questions I cannot answer," she finished. "Yes, I know." They stood there awkwardly, both knowing it was time to say goodbye, but neither quite knowing how. In the space of one night, something had shifted between them. They'd shared things people usually keep locked away. Fears and dreams, and the truth about who they really were beneath the roles they played for everyone else. "I want to give you something," Nasha said suddenly. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather pouch no bigger than Tommy's palm. "This is a medicine bag. Inside are herbs that will help with pain and fever. Also sage for cleansing, and a small turquoise stone. It is for protection." Tommy took it carefully, feeling the weight of it in his hand. "I can't take this." "You might need it. I have more," she said. "And you have a long journey ahead." "Take it." He tied the pouch to his belt next to his knife. "Thank you. For everything. The food, the medicine, He struggled to find the right words. "For treating me like a person instead of an enemy." "You did the same for me," Nasha said simply. Tommy knew he should go, but his feet wouldn't move. There was something he needed to say, something that had been building in him since their conversation by the fire. "What you said last night about wanting to teach and build bridges between people, that's not just a dream. That's important. Maybe the most important thing anyone could do right now. Important does not mean possible, but what if it is? What if you didn't?" He stopped himself, knowing he was about to cross a line, but then he thought about his mother, about how she'd always said following your heart took more courage than following the safe path. What if you didn't go through with the wedding? What if you left? Nasha's eyes widened. For a moment she looked scared, then angry, then something else entirely. "You do not understand what you are saying. If I refuse this marriage, I shame my father. I shame my family. I would have nowhere to go, no one to protect me. You could go to the mission, the one where you learned to read. They would take you in. And then what? I would be neither Apache nor white. I would belong nowhere." She turned away from him, her shoulders tense. "This is my life, Tommy, not yours. You cannot ride in here on a lame horse and tell me to throw away everything because of one conversation in the dark." She was right, and Tommy knew it. But the thought of her giving up her dreams, spending the rest of her life pretending to be someone she wasn't, it felt wrong in a way that made his chest ache. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything." Nasha was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "No, I am sorry. You are trying to help. That is kind, but kindness does not change reality." "Maybe not," Tommy agreed, "but sometimes it should." A sound carried up from the canyon below, voices and the jingle of horse tack. Nasha stiffened. "They are coming. You must go, now." Tommy grabbed Red's reins, his heart suddenly pounding. But before he could lead the horse away, Nasha caught his arm. "Wait, I want to give you one more thing." She pulled out her book and carefully tore out a single page from the back. Her handwriting covered it in neat rows, both in English and in Apache symbols. "This is the story I told you last night. About Coyote and Bear. About wisdom being different from cleverness." Tommy took the page and folded it carefully, tucking it inside his shirt where it would stay dry. "I'll keep it safe. And remember what it teaches," Nasha added. "The best man is not the one who wins every fight or never shows fear. The best man is the one who knows when to fight and when to listen, when to take and when to give, when to speak and when to stay silent." The voices were getting closer. Tommy could make out individual words now, though he didn't understand the Apache language. Maybe 2 or 3 people moving up the trail toward the camp. "I have to go," Tommy said, but he couldn't leave without saying one more thing. "Whatever happens with your marriage, whatever you decide, I hope you find a way to tell your stories. The world needs them. Both worlds need them." Nasha's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she blinked them back. "Go, before they see you." Tommy wanted to say more, He wanted to tell her that meeting her had changed something in him, had shown him what real courage looked like, but there was no time. He led Red away from the camp, moving as quickly and quietly as he could up the rocky slope on the opposite side of the canyon. He'd made it maybe 200 yards when he stopped behind a large boulder and looked back. Nasha was standing by the remains of the fire watching him go. Behind her, 3 figures on horseback were entering the camp. An older man, probably her father, and 2 younger men. One of them had to be her intended husband. Tommy felt a strange urge to go back to do something, though he had no idea what. But then Nasha turned away from him to greet her family, and the moment was gone. She stepped back into her role, back into the life that had been chosen for her. And Tommy was nothing but a stranger watching from a distance. He started walking again, leading Red carefully over the uneven ground. His body was still weak from the fever, and every step felt like it took more energy than he had, but he kept moving, putting distance between himself and the Apache camp. As he walked, Tommy reached up and touched the medicine bag at his belt. Then he felt the folded paper against his chest. Physical proof that last night had really happened, that it wasn't just some fever dream brought on by exhaustion and fear. By midday, Tommy found a creek and let Red drink while he sat in the shade and tried to figure out which direction to go. He'd lost his bearings during the storm, and the landscape all looked the same. Endless rocks and scrub brush and canyon walls. But as he sat there, something occurred to him. He was alone in Apache country, weak from sickness on a lame horse with no clear idea how to get back to the ranch. By all rights, he should be terrified. And part of him was. But another part, a part that felt new, like it had been born during that long night by the fire, felt something else entirely. He felt awake. All his life, Tommy had been chasing other people's ideas of what it meant to be a man. His father's ideas, the other cowboys' ideas, the heroes in those cheap novels he'd read as a kid. But Nasha had shown him something different. She'd shown him that real strength wasn't about never being afraid or always knowing what to do. It was about being honest with yourself and others even when it was hard. It was about holding on to what mattered, even when the whole world was pushing you to let it go. Tommy pulled out the page from Nasha's book and read it again in the daylight. The story of Coyote and Bear. He read it 3 times, memorizing not just the words but the lesson behind them. Then he folded it carefully and put it back against his heart. The sun was starting its downward journey toward evening when Tommy finally spotted something familiar, a distinctive rock formation that he remembered, passing on the drive south. He was about 10 miles east of where he should be, but at least now he knew which direction to go. It would take him 2 days to get back to the ranch, maybe 3 if he had to stop and rest Red's leg. The other cowboys would assume he'd died in the storm or been killed by Apache. When he showed up alive, there would be questions, but Tommy wasn't worried about that anymore. He had a story to tell, not the whole story maybe, but enough of it. He'd tell them about getting lost in the storm, about taking shelter in a cave, about the fever that nearly killed him. All of that was true in its way. What he wouldn't tell them was about Nasha. That part was private, sacred somehow, but he would remember what she'd asked of him. When the other cowboys spoke badly about Apache people, when they called them savages or animals, he would speak up. Carefully maybe, quietly, but he would speak. That was the debt he owed, not just to Nasha but to himself, to the person he wanted to become. Tommy climbed back onto Red, moving slowly so he wouldn't put too much weight on the bad leg. Then he turned the horse west, toward the ranch, toward whatever came next. The sun was warm on his back, and the medicine bag bumped gently against his hip with each step. And for the first time since leaving Kansas, Tommy Whitaker felt like he was heading in the right direction. Tommy made it back to the Crawford Ranch 3 days after the storm. He was sunburned, exhausted, and Red was limping worse than before. When he rode into the yard, the other cowboys stopped what they were doing and stared like they were seeing a ghost. Bill Hendricks, the trail boss, walked over with his arms crossed. "Well, I'll be damned. We figured you for dead, boy. What the hell happened to you?" Tommy climbed down from Red, his legs nearly buckling. "Got separated in the storm. Took shelter in some rocks up in the canyon country. Came down with a fever that knocked me flat for a day and a half. Soon as I could ride, I started looking for the trail back. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough of it that Tommy didn't feel like he was lying. The other cowboys gathered around, asking questions, slapping him on the back. For the first time since he'd arrived at the ranch, They were treating him like one of them, like he'd passed some kind of test by surviving. "You're one lucky son of a gun," one of the older hands said. "That's rough country to be lost in, especially with Apache moving through." Tommy just nodded and took Red to the stable. He rubbed the horse down, checked his leg, and made sure he had food and water. The whole time, his hand kept drifting to the medicine bag at his belt. Touching it made him feel connected to something important, even if he couldn't quite explain what. Over the next few weeks, Tommy fell back into the routine of ranch work. But something had changed in him, and the other cowboys noticed. He was quieter now, more thoughtful. When they sat around the fire at night telling stories and making jokes, Tommy would listen more than he talked. And when the conversation turned to Apache raids, or the Indian problem as they called it, Tommy would sometimes speak up. "They're just people," he said one night after a cowboy named Frank had been going on about how Apache were nothing but murdering savages, same as us, trying to protect what's theirs. Frank had looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "The hell are you talking about, boy? They kill settlers. They steal cattle and horses. They're the enemy." "Maybe," Tommy said carefully. "Or maybe they're just fighting for their land the same way we'd fight if someone came and took ours." It didn't change Frank's mind, and it didn't stop the other cowboys from talking the way they always had. But Tommy had spoken up. He'd paid a small part of the debt he owed, and each time he did it, it got a little easier. The months passed. Summer turned to fall and fall to winter. Tommy stayed on at the ranch, and slowly he earned his place among the men. Not by being the toughest or the loudest, but by being reliable. By doing his work well and treating all people with respect. The other cowboys stopped calling him boy and started using his name. By the time spring came around again, Tommy had saved up almost $200. It was more money than he'd ever had in his life. Bill Hendricks offered him a permanent position as a regular hand, with better pay and a promise that he could learn to break horses if he wanted. It was everything Tommy had come west looking for. Security, respect, a place where he belonged. But something was nagging at him. On quiet nights when he couldn't sleep, he'd take out that folded page from Nasha's book and read it by candlelight. He'd memorized the words long ago, but seeing her handwriting made him feel like she was still there, still teaching him about wisdom and courage. He wondered what had happened to her. Whether she'd gone through with the marriage, whether she was happy or at least content, whether she was still writing her stories or if that dream had died like so many dreams did when they met the hard edges of reality. Tommy didn't have answers to those questions. But the wondering wouldn't leave him alone. In the spring of 1889, nearly 2 years after that night in the storm, Tommy made a decision. He gave his notice to Crawford, packed his few belongings, and headed east toward New Mexico territory. He'd heard there were towns out there that needed men who could handle themselves, places where the old rules were starting to change. But the real reason he went was because he'd heard something else. He'd heard that near the reservation at Fort Apache, there was a school. A small place where Apache children were being taught to read and write, not to forget their language but to learn both worlds. And the teacher, people said, was a young Apache woman who'd been educated at the missions but had come back to help her people. Tommy didn't know if it was Nasha. The odds were probably against it. But the possibility was enough to make him go looking. It took him a month to get there, working odd jobs along the way to pay for supplies. When he finally reached the Fort Apache area, he asked around about the school. An army sergeant pointed him toward a small adobe building on the edge of the reservation. "That's where the Indian teacher works," the sergeant said. "Doing more good than most of the officials, if you ask me. Teaching the kids to read in both languages, helping them understand the white man's ways without forgetting their own." Tommy's heart was pounding as he rode toward the building. It was late afternoon, and he could see children playing outside. Apache kids running and laughing, their voices carrying on the wind. Through the open door, he could hear someone reading aloud in English, then repeating the words in Apache. He tied his horse to a post and walked to the doorway. Inside, about a dozen children sat on benches, their attention focused on the woman standing at the front of the room. She had her back to him, writing something on a slate board. When she turned around, Tommy's breath caught. It was her, Nasha. Older by 2 years, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a simple dress that was neither fully Apache nor fully white, but something in between. But it was definitely her. Their eyes met across the room. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The children were watching now, sensing something important was happening even if they didn't understand what. Then Nasha smiled. Not a big smile, but a real one. The kind that reached her eyes and made her whole face light up. "Class," she said in Apache, then in English. "We will finish early today. Go home to your families. We will continue tomorrow." The children filed out, casting curious glances at Tommy as they passed. Once they were alone, Nasha walked to the doorway. She stood there looking at him like she was trying to make sure he was real and not just someone she'd imagined. "Hello, Tommy," she said finally. "Hello, Nasha." He couldn't stop staring at her. "You did it. You're teaching. You're telling your stories." "Some of them," she agreed. "It is not easy. There are people who think I should teach only the white ways, and others who think I betray our people by teaching English at all. But I am doing what I can." "What happened? With the marriage, I mean." "Did you?" Nasha held up her hand. "That is a long story, but the short version is that I did not marry him. I chose a different path. It was hard and there were consequences, but I am here now doing this work. That is what matters." Tommy felt like his chest might burst. "I kept your page. The story about Coyote and Bear. I read it so many times the paper started to fall apart, so I copied it out fresh. Kept it in my saddlebag." "And did you learn what it was trying to teach you?" Tommy thought about the last 2 years. The hard lessons and the small victories. The times he'd spoken up when it was easier to stay quiet. The way he'd slowly figured out what kind of man he wanted to be. Not by copying someone else, but by listening to that voice inside that told him what was right. "I'm still learning," he said, "but I'm trying. That is all any of us can do." Nasha stepped out into the sunlight, and Tommy noticed she wore a small medicine bag at her belt, similar to the one she'd given him. "Why did you come here, Tommy?" "What are you looking for?" It was a good question. Tommy had spent so much time getting here that he hadn't thought much about what would come next. "I wanted to see if you were okay, if you'd found a way to keep your dream alive. And now that you know?" "Now I don't know," Tommy admitted. "I've been working ranches for 2 years, saving money. I'm good at it. I could probably get work anywhere in the territory. But lately I've been thinking about what you said that night, about building bridges between people. And I wondered if maybe I could help with that somehow." Nasha studied his face. "This is a hard life teaching here. The pay is almost nothing. The work is frustrating. Many people do not want bridges. They want walls." "I know," Tommy said. "But that just means the bridges are more important, doesn't it?" A slow smile spread across Nasha's face. "You have learned wisdom. Maybe that fever knocked some sense into you after all." They both laughed, and just like that, the strangeness between them disappeared. They were just two people who'd met on a stormy night 2 years ago, and had both found the courage to follow difficult paths. "There is a ranch about 5 miles from here," Nasha said. "They need a foreman. The owner is a fair man who treats his Apache workers with respect. If you are serious about staying, I could introduce you." "I'd like that," Tommy said. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, they sat on the steps of the schoolhouse and talked. About the last 2 years, about the roads they'd traveled, about the dreams they'd held on to and the ones they'd let go, and about the future which suddenly seemed full of possibility. Tommy never became famous. His name isn't in history books and no one wrote songs about him. But he stayed in New Mexico, working that ranch and helping Nasha with her school in whatever ways he could. He learned Apache and Spanish. He taught some of the older boys how to work cattle, and they taught him about tracking and reading the land. And every year on the anniversary of that stormy night, Tommy would take out that page from Nasha's book, carefully preserved now, protected between 2 pieces of glass, and read the story of Coyote and Bear, reminding himself of the lessons he'd learned in one night that had changed the course of his life. That being a man wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about knowing when to fight and when to listen, when to take and when to give, when to hold on tight and when to let go, and most of all, it was about having the courage to follow your heart, even when the whole world said you should do otherwise. Those were the lessons an Apache bride had taught a young cowboy on a night when the storm had washed away everything except what really mattered, and they were lessons that lasted a lifetime.